thank you very much, Kareem, for that really very kind introduction. It's really a great pleasure to be back here with you again, albeit, I believe, for the last time. But as Kareem said, I'm going to spend the next just couple of minutes talking to you about the importance of getting an updated booster vaccine as we enter into the holiday season and the colder weeks and months of the late fall and early winter. So let's just talk very briefly about what we know about the vaccines, because we want to make our decisions really based on facts, evidence, and data. Are the vaccines safe? That keeps coming up. The answer is now, overwhelmingly, it should be off the table. There have been 13 billion doses of a COVID-19 vaccine that have been distributed worldwide, hundreds of millions in the United States, and there's robust safety monitoring systems that are in place. And clearly, an extensive body of information clearly indicates that they're safe. Next, are they effective? And I believe you are all aware of this. If you look at the striking data, overwhelmingly show the effectiveness of vaccines, particularly in preventing severe illness and deaths. And recent data that has come out indicate that if, in fact, you are vaccinated and boosted compared to an unvaccinated person, there's a 14 times lower risk of dying in the most recent BA.4/5 era compared to unvaccinated, and at least a 3 times lower risk of testing positive compared to the unvaccinated individuals. But then there's some issues that we have to deal with that are sometimes confusing to the American public. If that's such great data, why do you tell us that we should be, for our own safety and that of our families and the community, get a booster shot? There are 2 issues that in some respects are unprecedented when it comes to infectious diseases. And that is, as good as the vaccine is, and as good as post-infection protection is, the immunity and protection wanes over time. Let me put it into some perspective for you. If you get vaccinated with measles or infected with measles, the duration of protection is measured at a minimum in decades and likely for a lifetime. That just happens to, unfortunately, not be the case when you're dealing with coronavirus and particularly SARS-CoV-2. So you need to update the protection that we know is good protection. Next, we have the complicating issue that we can't do anything about, is that you have the emergence every several months now, historically, of variants. Remember, Delta, Omicron, BA.4/5, BQ 1.1, the things that we're all hearing about and reading about and seeing. You don't have that with another example, just getting back to measles, which we're all familiar with. There are no variants of measles. I got infected with measles when I was a youngster because I'm old enough to not be getting the vaccine. And that measles is the same measles that's circulating now in the developing world. It doesn't change. And that's the 2 major reasons for getting a booster. The booster's bivalent. People get confused with that word. What does bivalent means? There's 2 components. One is the ancestral original vaccine that we all got, and the other is the updated BA.4/5. So then people ask appropriate questions. Do they really work? What are the parameters to see if they work? There are 2 parameters. One is what the vaccine does in boosting an immune response. We refer to that in the medical circles as immune correlates. And then there's the real-world vaccine efficacy. If you look at the recent data that has now been coming out from the companies as well as academic investigators, it is clear now, despite initial bit of confusion, that the BA.4/5 bivalent booster, what we refer to as the updated vaccine, clearly induces a better response against BA.4/5 and the sublineages of BA.4/5 than does the ancestral strain. So from a pure immunological standpoint, it looks quite good. Clinical efficacy data from the CDC will be released. In fact, it already has been released. It was supposed to be released at 11:30, which is clinical efficacy data, looking at real-world data of hundreds of thousands of people looking at the capability of the virus to protect against the real world BA.4/5 that has been circulating. And we know that that is really quite good. So you have immunological data, and you have now clinical efficacy data. Everybody was asking the question, where's the clinical efficacy data? Now it has come out with the CDC MMWR this morning. So we know it's safe. We know that it is effective. So my message, and my final message, maybe the final message I give you from this podium, is that please, for your own safety, for that of your family, get your updated COVID-19 shot as soon as you're eligible to protect yourself, your family, and your community. I urge you to visit vaccines.gov to find a location where you can easily get an updated vaccine. And please do it as soon as possible. Thank you.
One more, if you don't
Sure.
mind. This is your last appearance at the podium. You became a household name in large part because of your appearances here at the early stages of COVID. What do you want Americans to remember about your service in government?
Well, I think what I've accomplished in my 54 years at the NIH and my 38 years as the director of NIAID, although COVID is really, really very important, it is a fragment of the total 40 years that I've been doing it. So I'll let other people judge the value or not of my accomplishments. But what I would like people to remember about what I've done is that every day for all of those years, I've given it everything that I have, and I've never left anything on the field. So if they want to remember me, whether they judge rightly or wrongly what I've done, I gave it all I got for many decades.
Fauci, for you specifically, what was the most difficult moment of the pandemic response for you throughout the last two and a half years?
I'll start with the first, and then obviously Dr. Fauci can answer the second. So the short answer is no. First of all, you can't predict with any certainty. So we don't know what Mother Nature is going to throw at us. That said, these subvariants, obviously we're tracking them very closely. The good news is, even if you see a diminishing of our vaccines, they're still effective against these subvariants. Way more effective than the original vaccine, right? So I feel very confident that if people continue to get vaccinated at good numbers, if people get boosted, we can absolutely have a very safe and healthy holiday season. Well, there's always a caveat here of things out of the left field you can't predict, and you can't. But nothing I have seen in the subvariants makes me believe that we can't manage our way through it effectively, especially if people step up and get their vaccine.
So that's a really difficult question to answer, but the most difficult because, we've all lived through almost 3 years of the most horrendous outbreak that we've experienced as a society in well over 100 years. But there are certain things that stand out. I mean, I could probably write an essay on all the things that were difficult time. But one of the things as a physician whose goal in life is to care for patients and to prevent and treat illness and ameliorate suffering, is that I remember back in my days in medical school and when I was an intern and a resident, when a patient came in, whether or not the patient didn't like you, was angry with you, whether it was a rich person or a poor person, you treated everybody the same because you cared about them and you wanted everyone to walk out healthy. So when I see people in this country, because of the divisiveness in our country, of not getting vaccinated for reasons that have nothing to do with public health, but have to do because of divisiveness and ideological differences, as a physician, it pains me because I don't want to see anybody get infected. I don't want to see anybody hospitalized, and I don't want to see anybody die from COVID. Whether you're a far-right Republican or a far-left Democrat, it doesn't make any difference to me. I look upon it the same way as I did in the emergency room in the middle of New York City when I was taking care of everybody that was coming in off the street. So that's the thing that troubles me most about this.
Dr. Fauci, only 13%.
I'm sorry to contradict you, but there was some dubious advice coming out of the White House. There was some dubious advice, some questionable medical advice coming out of non-doctors
Right.
at this podium. How do you think that affected the progress of this
Well,
pandemic?
you remember, if you were around, that at this podium, I contradicted those, which set off a whole series of things in my life. But, yeah, I mean, we have to continue, and we were just talking about this a little while ago. The way you counter misinformation and disinformation is that to do whatever you can, as often as you can, to provide correct information. The people who have correct information, who take science seriously, who don't have strange way out theories about things, but who base what they say on evidence and data, need to speak up more, because the other side that just keeps putting out misinformation and disinformation seems to be tireless in that effort, and it's going to be very difficult.
Dr. Fauci,
right,
related
thank
to
you.
the likely
Thank you.
aggressive oversight from House Republicans, the new majority next year that they've been
So,
promising on some
hold
of
on
these
one
very-
second. Dr. Jha is going to stay to take a couple more questions, but Dr. Fauci actually has to go. So thank you so much, Dr. Fauci.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can answer his
You want
question.
to answer it?
Yeah.
Okay. He says I'll answer it. Okay,
I'm a
go
good-
ahead. Go ahead. I'm just trying to keep him
all
on
right.
time.
The answer is, if there are oversight hearings, I absolutely will cooperate fully and testify before the Congress if asked. You may not know, but I've testified before the Congress a few hundred times, okay, over the last 40 years or so. So I have no trouble testifying. We can defend and explain and stand by everything that we've said, so I have nothing to hide.
Just a quick follow-up on that, Dr. Fauci. How much do you think, Dr. Fauci, how much, just a follow-up on the oversight, Dr. Fauci.
All right, thank you, Dr. Fauci.
Time for a couple of questions?
We'll take a couple,